Welcome to the Band of Gamers podcast. And we are joined by our regular crew tonight. So thank you for being back with us. This is episode 86. We have Zeus Adamus and Osiris Prime is back in the house as well. Welcome back, Osiris.
Thanks. Good to be back.
So, as Zeus gets the updates out and lets people know that we are going live, if you did not listen up and you are remembering that we usually broadcast on a Monday night, we had a Thursday news podcast as well, episode 85.5. Maybe we'll come up with a catchier name at some point, but right now we're still playing around with formats. So if you did not listen to that, that was a quick little half-hour podcast kind of wrapping up the gaming's news. We had a Microsoft earnings call and some information there. We also had, obviously, the Call of Duty World War II announcement and drop there to talk about, along with some other bits and pieces. So tonight we are back on our regular schedule in terms of getting some topics in and maybe even a little bit of what we've been playing. And we're going to keep this to a focused, tight discussion because, as alluded to last week, we're going to touch on some nerves. Zeus brought up the idea that the Super Nintendo was not the greatest console ever. So we are going to spend a little bit of time tonight laying out what we believe, each of us individually, because truthfully, I don't even know what the other gentlemen think. Why is the greatest console? So okay, here's some ground rules before we get started. We're going to give a little bit of opening remarks, tell what we think, a quick 1 or 2 minute opening statement. We'll have a couple points then of why we think it is the greatest console with some chance for some counterpoints, right? We'll be civilized. We can, even without Gray here, we can still be civilized. So, and then obviously a little bit of wrap up, but we will save a little bit of time at the end to talk about what we've been playing because I have spent this weekend playing some fun stuff with my kids. So, Zeus, this is your topic. I'm going to let you kick over the first sacred cow. So, what do you believe is the greatest console?
Oh, so we're just going straight to declaring?
Straight to the winner.
No, go ahead. You can
Straight to the winner.
You have your audience here. You have an unprepared Osiris Prime as our judge and jury. So you can open your remarks up with any type of framework that you want, sir.
Yeah, so I guess I kind of wanted to kind of walk it through and put it in some context a little bit first. What spawned this, and I mentioned it briefly on the news show, is a few times since I would say the middle of last year, I have heard a few podcast hosts and a few friends of mine, former staffers on different websites that I've worked for, people I know locally, make the claim that the Super Nintendo Entertainment System is the greatest console of all time. And as I mentioned before, whenever somebody makes that claim, I'm a numbers guy, right? Quantify itself. You quantify everything. If you're going to make a claim, you put some numbers and some metrics behind it, right? So hey, and in podcast parlance, when I've been on other shows, not necessarily this one, but other shows, I kind of am very demanding, when we do like comic book reviews or video game reviews or product comparisons, and I force people to pick and put a number, on a thing. So I'm glad that people, will make that claim. But of course, once you make that claim, then I like to then challenge you and ask you what's the rationale. And quite honestly, a lot of people, including, I would say, professional media personalities or journalists, don't have the most robust rationale behind that claim. So I kind of wanted to walk through it and see what you guys felt. And also just kind of maybe make a pitch that gamers as a community kind of, I don't want to say think a little more before they say things, but like elevate the conversation, right? Like, we're trying to say that we're exiting the console wars, or that the console wars are over. The rabid fanboyism has died down to a quiet lull. So if we're gonna have these conversations, let's kind of use the Socratic method, right? And put some rationale and some argument behind it. So that's kind of the space that this is coming from. Go ahead, DB.
academic dialogue in a podcast? Oh man, now you're dragging us down. What? We can't just fire from the hip and not check facts?
Right, exactly.
No,
blame
I
each
think
other?
I think this is a great way to have this discussion, right? I think that not just kind of going on an emotional gut reaction, but to think about why you make that claim. And truthfully, I have, after this conversation from last week, the idea of what is the greatest counsel versus what may be a personal favorite is certainly a distinction that we all should think about. And then I think you're right, Zeus, is what are some of those criteria? And so for me, some of the criteria that I looked at is obviously one, sales, market penetration, what kind of number sales, and what does that, it doesn't mean it's the end all be all, right? But again, I think the other piece of it is I'm thinking about kind of the breadth of software. Is this something that was for a certain type of audience? Did it expand the audience? And even within that software, what kind of genres and the gameplay styles that were created or maybe tweaked and formalized during that generation. And then I think one of the other things I was thinking about was, are there other kind of innovations and novelties, maybe not novelties after just looking at a Power Glove review, right? But the idea of other innovations that might have come with this console. So those are the things that I'm thinking about. Zeus, what are some of the criteria that you're thinking?
Well, we kind of went through a chunk of mine last week when we brought this topic up, right? So I guess my main pushback on the Super NES console being the greatest of all time, just to reframe it in context, is I don't feel so. This is so first. So Super NES console generation 4, right? And we had a discussion last week about console generation 4 and kind of reminisced and brought back memories and talked about our favorite titles of the time. So. That console generation was the Super Nintendo, the Sega Genesis, the TurboGrafx, and the Neo Geo. And as we mentioned last week, Neo Geo was overpriced. It really was just never going to be competitive in the market, and TurboGrafx kind of came late to the party. Neither really ever had any significant populist uptake, so it was really a two-horse race. And so in contrast to other later generations where things have been much tighter, right? You look at console generation 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, one of the longest life cycles of a console generation, and one of the tightest races. Now, you can claim that in the out years, the importance of that sales number competition kind of dwindled. But the fact of the matter is that, and I won't get into, when numbers get in the margins, it gets tough to claim which number is exactly the right one. But the point is the 360 took off like a shotgun to a huge lead, right? In the opening years of that generation, and as we started getting into years, 4, the PS3 really kind of started turning the corner just in gaining its own more solid reputation kind of in year 3. Some major titles came out that kind of defined that console. And as it proceeded into years like 5 and 6, it really started turning the corner and closing the gap on sales numbers with the Xbox 360. If we considered all of the years of that generation to be significant, that was as white knuckle, tight gripped of a race as I think there's ever been in a console generation. And it really came down to the wire, and their final sales numbers before the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 took over were remarkably close. I think within like the tens of thousands. So
yeah, they look neck and neck, as of my Wikipedia research that I did prior to this podcast. Yeah, that you had Xbox 360 at 84 million, and PlayStation 3 ultimately ended up with 83.8 million. So you're right, they ended up neck and neck, which is certainly not the way that generation started. So before I come back to you, Zeus, and let you expand a little bit more, Prime. So you weren't part of this conversation last week, but if we're thinking about what type of criteria might help determine the greatest in terms of a console, or what you would be thinking, what would criteria be for you?
Well, I hear kind of like Zeus. I've heard this many a times. This topic come up on different podcasts and whatnot, articles, game articles and stuff. And I always think how this is so different from when somebody asks you, what's your favorite music or what's your favorite movie or book or anything like that. Because I can rattle that off pretty quickly, to a point. Obviously, you have different moods and stuff, but you usually have at least a handful of favorites that you get out there, or at least a couple. So, but when it comes to games and game systems, I don't know. It always seems so hard. It's like when I hear that, I start thinking about it, and I start thinking, well, it's pretty much what I'm playing now, I guess. Usually, like whatever system I'm currently using. And I do have a pick here later on. I'll throw my pick out there. It might surprise you guys, but I'll throw it out there. Not now. But I think some of the criteria, like you mentioned, say if you're just kind of thinking broader, if I'm not doing a personal pick here, you want to think about how the graphics are. Do they hold up? Obviously, if you're talking about Super Nintendo, those kind of cartoony graphics, I think we can all agree on that for the most part. Back on the SNES. And those, they hold up obviously because they're, hand drawn, and it's like almost like a cartoon, like I mentioned. Sales obviously is, I get, a big thing overall. Something else you had mentioned, I've lost my thought now. Just a variety of different kind of games. SNES, I guess there's a variety if you want to call it that. You have side scrollers, or you have like RPGs, which is still kind of a side scrolling because you can only go one way more or less. I mean, there are some kind of 3D-ish kind of games on the system, but overall, it's just kind of one-dimensional kind of gaming, I guess, if you want to call it that. So there, there's that factor. But I guess what it comes down to, and even kind of a personal choice, is did you have fun on the system itself? I mean, you can have all them, types of games and all kinds of varied games, and okay, it sold 70 million, but did people have fun when they were playing that? And that can be, I guess you can kind of get a group to kind of decide on that. But I don't know, it just kind of ultimately it's like one of the hardest things I think for games, trying to pinpoint one game system. So I guess that's how I kind of feel about this whole thing. Just
and I kind of like with music, or like you mentioned with music, right? For me, that's when that conversational topic comes up, and I definitely have some very terse opposition to a lot of people who will claim like, so and so was the greatest like rock album ever made. I'm like, yeah, it was intensely popular, but it only appealed to like 2% of the population, right? That doesn't make it the greatest. So, in the walk up to having this conversation, I acknowledge that that's a valid position to take, right? And it's definitely feasible that a lot of people would say, well, you can't even argue this, right? That there is no single choice for greatest console generation of all time. All that can be done is that each individual gamer can declare their favorite.
I think that's true. I think there is a lot of the potential for personal choice, personal kind of interpretation in this. But I think the other piece to think about is that, again, if the question is not your favorite or but thinking about what makes it the best or the greatest, and I think that does leave a little bit of room for something that is not just subjective, that you have, if depending on your criteria, right, that you could say that, I in my case, I think that games from this generation really kind of laid the groundwork for the multiple generations that came after it, and that things may be refined and tweaked, but in terms of the general structure that this generation that I'm choosing certainly maybe not nailed it, but it set up that framework that has followed since then. And so to me, that's one of the criteria, that it is not just, it is. And again, I think the other challenge of this is just like being able to say that 16-bit graphics hold up. They do, because we're at a time and place where it seems to, right? And 32-bit graphics, or even PlayStation 2, Xbox One, GameCube graphics get a little blocky. Maybe those don't hold up now, but at some point do they become retro? Or, I think the question of graphical interpretation is tricky, because then it also, like any list, it's a matter of the time that it was created. So in the year of 2017, I'm going to go first and say that my greatest console is the PlayStation 2. And it's a console that I did not own until it became a slim version. I was not an early adopter, but I'm looking back at it subjectively, and truthfully, that's probably why it is my pick for greatest, is that it isn't an emotional pick, that it is not only obviously the sales numbers, right? At 155 million worldwide, that alone could make it the greatest if that was my criteria, but to me, that's not necessarily a useful criteria. To me, the criteria of thinking about the breadth of software, right? That there were sports games and action games and RPGs and FPSs, and you had, you had role-playing games with Final Fantasy XI, where you were playing with both PlayStation 2 and PC gamers. You had SOCOM, where you could play online. You had the PlayStation Eye, the initial kind of first steps into motion gaming. But I think the 3D worlds that were created, while rudimentary, and even things like the original Grand Theft Auto 3 may not hold up as well, but the bones of that game are still what is selling Grand Theft Auto 5 and putting it on the top 10 list every month. It is the general structure of those genres were matured during this generation. So I think that is my pick, and that's not even mentioning the fact that it was a giant Trojan horse with a DVD player, and it got it into a whole bunch of people's homes. But I think there are some other picks out there as well. So Zeus, what are your thoughts?
So I guess before I pitch mine, I'd like to talk through a couple points. Some are supporting, some are supporting, some are opposing. So first of all, right off the bat, I can get behind that. I can immediately think of rationale why someone would, quantitatively and qualitatively select that console. I feel like the PlayStation 2 was, first of all, from a sales perspective, that was the first console that was really difficult to obtain at launch. That was kind of the tip over point where, because of the PlayStation, really, gaming had become mainstream enough that lots of people were aware of the launch date. Before, nobody outside the gaming community knew when the Sega Saturn was coming out, or the PlayStation. But the PlayStation was that first step towards making gaming a common cultural and social medium, and put it in the homes of a lot of people, kind of in a central family room location. And so when the PlayStation 2 dropped, interest was pretty high, and it was hard to obtain. So that right there pops it up into that upper strata of significance for me. DB, would you? Yeah.
No, it's hard to obtain. It was, part of it was shortages. Part of it was demand. I think it's also it was in a really unique spot, right? We talked about last week the idea of the Genesis being a little more mature than the Super Nintendo, and obviously the PlayStation 1 was a whole lot more mature and varied than the Nintendo 64. I think it also came at a time as gamers who had been maturing and growing up had more disposable income, and so that awareness of release dates, it was a nice kind of juncture of generations aging to a point where they had that money to spend, and also media being invested in it more so than it was before. And I would venture to guess that even the internet, in its early stages there in 2000, had something to do with it as well.
Yeah, I definitely concur with you on that notion that, that was the point where a lot of gamers who had grown up on 16-bit consoles, the Sega and the Super NES, were entering their, late 20s, early 30s, were kind of hitting that midpoint of their careers where they were getting, some salary bumps. They were kind of probably maneuvering out of that living paycheck to paycheck, time period, and then we're able to to kind of rally the business behind the PlayStation 2. Now, where I feel like there's a bit of a detraction is, and not so much as the Super Nintendo is the competitiveness of the space, right? So the Xbox came out, and I personally feel at an emotional level, the Xbox was a challenger. The OG Xbox was a challenger to the PlayStation 2. I bought it, and it definitely. So that was the first time. That was the second time where I owned more than one console of a given generation, and it definitely started splitting my attention. Right. I definitely had games that I would play on the Xbox versus games that I would buy for the PlayStation 2. You mentioned it's a bit of an elbow in the ribs. You mentioned first person shooters on PlayStation 2, and I just felt like the DualShock controller at that point to me was a horrible first person shooter controller.
No, I could see that, right? I mean, it's certainly the Duke, for its size, just the layout that the Xbox controller has maintained over generations has still been, to me, a preferable layout, right? I mean, this is why I chose Xbox One over PlayStation 4 this generation, was about the controller. But I think about games like Time Splitters or Black, that you had, it wasn't so much about whether or not the controller was optimal, it was the fact that it had those types of gaming experiences. Because I think, it would be hard pressed to say that the premier first person shooters weren't on the Xbox.
I guess I guess my perspective is I come at it from, to me, the release of Halo was one of the biggest mic drops that has ever occurred in the gaming industry. And once that thing was on the market, to me, that game in first person shooters on consoles became the benchmark. And for me, I'm hard pressed to think of any game, in a from a 360 perspective. So talking about the platform, the controller, and the games itself, it's hard for me to think of anything in that generation that stacks up against Halo. But that's just me. My big problem with the dual axis controller originally was, so with those buttons, the analog sticks being right across from each other, particularly on the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2, I would, frequently my thumbs would float a little bit off. And so eventually I would get this action where my thumbs would actually hit each other while playing with the things. I will admit it, I'm a large American, right, in comparison to, who do you design consoles for, like a Japanese, a Southeast, an Asian audience or an American audience. And for me, Xbox has always kind of represented a design aspect leaning more towards the big chunky controller for hands for people from Texas or something, and the PlayStation controllers have always leaned more towards supporting kind of Asian dimensions. But that's just my perspective. But yeah, I'm behind. When I bought my Xbox 360 because of the year lead, I kept my PlayStation 2 available to continue playing, and there were lots of games that I held on to my PlayStation 3 launch unit simply because it had the hardware-based backwards compatibility. So yeah, I definitely I feel you.
Yeah, no, and I mean, there's certainly faults to point out in that. I agree, and I think that's why I was trying to make the case that it's not just numbers, but also your point is well taken in terms of first-person shooters. Certainly, right? I think that makes a huge difference. I think you can also make the case that Western RPGs, were much better on Xbox, right? You had BioWare's obviously Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. You also had Morrowind with Elder Scrolls 3 being there. So there was, capacity there in terms of a console. Yeah, I think also the idea of the original Xbox having a built-in hard drive was a key feature, and one thing that I loved from the very beginning as somebody who played PC games before then. So we poked some holes in the argument of the PlayStation 2 being the greatest console. Zeus, I'm going to guess that is not your pick. So why don't you do us the honor of laying out your argument for what you believe is the greatest console?
So I'll get straight to it. So my personal assessment of the greatest console of all time is it's the Xbox 360. And my reason for that is so that to me is the first generation where the complexity of the competitive market reached an apex. You had the complexities of software as a service. You had as we started to get towards games that were not solely encapsulated by what you got on your disc. You had the service component, right, with the Xbox Live service and an internet-based infrastructure. You had kind of new competitive vectors, right, in terms of like what Microsoft did to manage the Xbox Live Command Center, like was just epic. Like nothing like that had ever been done before. And in stark contrast to, Sony having their entire multiplayer online service backbone hacked and destroyed, in that same console generation, and a service that, quite frankly, they never got right, like never figured out. For Microsoft to, for them to be the newest entrant into the console competitive space, to have come with the forbearance of the design and the concept of operations of that whole online service was just amazing. Like if you can think back, and imagine, like, and compare the way updates worked on the Xbox 360. I don't like in the early days of the that generation, like you would bring up your 360, go to pull up a game, it would grab an update, and it would grab that update and install it in around 20 seconds. In comparison to the PlayStation, which would grab it, think about it, twiddle its thumbs, dance a jig. Like I would go and literally have dinner while I was doing a game not an operating system update, a game update. It was simply amazing. And a lot of times the Xbox would just grab those updates when you weren't even queuing the game up to play, right? It would just grab them quickly. You would see a little meter load thing. It was just amazing. So in my mind, the market was as competitive as it ever got. Microsoft, in my mind, executed the most brilliant example of overall strategy in competing in that generation. I think they faced particular adversity in the Red Ring of Death debacle. But I think most importantly, they responded by stepping up and doing the right thing, right? They said, look, we're going to extend the coverage for everybody's 360. We're going to take the financial hit. It wiped their profits for that year when they implemented that. I think they actually may have rolled the impact of that into the next tax year, but it wiped their profits for like a year. So that's it. I mean, I guess that's the majority of my rationale. So Prime, you were firmly in the console gaming space by this time. What is your pick for the greatest console of all time? Have you had some time to kind of mull it over?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to piggyback on what you were saying, because this was actually my pick also after thinking about it for a long time. And then obviously this is just personal choice here. But just to go on with what you were saying, obviously, you had Xbox Live, excuse me. You had the digital games starting to come out a lot now, more so on the tail end, I guess you want to say, like the back half of the console. And you had the variety. Obviously, there's sports games, shooters, RPGs, there's all kinds of games that you can get on the Xbox 360. Shovelware. You had Sneak King if you went to Burger King at one point. But to go a little expand on it a little bit more, you had the rise of the online community, which, for better or for worse, that's all an opinion, people's choice, whether it was good or bad. But I started jumping online a lot more, obviously on Xbox 360. I never had an original Xbox, and PS2 I got late in life, and I don't even know if there was an online community for that or not. I don't really remember.
And just to interject it, like for me, and I suspect you might be like, not only did I get online more, but I got online the most, right? Never before and never since have I been online as much with a tight circle of friends, of people that I recurrently played with on a regular basis. Because again, I feel like that element of the gaming industry peaked during that time. Like, it was the greatest experience of an online community. And it has since degraded and never been repeated, in my opinion.
So let me ask both of you guys a question about that then, right? If this is, and I have a couple statements that I think would actually support why your choice is not a bad choice. But my question is the criteria of having it be someplace that you spent a lot of time, or that the online community was maturing, or that there was a robust community about that. Is that more about the player base than it is the council, or is it the fact that it's the council that created that infrastructure that allowed the player base to thrive?
So for me, I mention those things because I think that they are occurrences that are a result of the engineering, management, and operations of the entire Xbox product platform, and I don't separate them. So the Xbox 360 was that piece of hardware, but like its ecosystem was backed by the service, the operations of the service, how it handled maintenance. It's all the things that the business do to incentivize people to invest time in that experience. So yes, but I feel like those things occurred because Xbox Live was such a comparatively great service at that point in time in history.
Yeah, and actually, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I cut you off, so go ahead. Continue.
I was just going to say, at that point, I had actually started. Well, I shouldn't say started. I was kind of doing more PC gaming at that point before I got my 360. So I was buying pretty much everything on PC. Once I bought the 360 on a whim, basically. It was a New Year's Eve. I wasn't doing anything New Year's Eve that year. So I had bought the Xbox 360. I think it came out 2005. I bought it that December, basically New Year's Eve, December 31st. Just on a whim, I saw it in the stores. I wasn't doing anything. I was just rolling around the store. I bought it. I was like, oh, what the heck? Well, I'll get it. And I just jumped right into it. I jumped online. I was doing everything at that point. And it just kind of snowballed after that. I was playing online, and obviously I had some friends that were playing on 360. But not a lot. But I was, you could just, go into a random match of, randoms and, play. Obviously, some people don't like that. There's problems. But I don't know. I must have been lucky. Who knows? But I hardly ever saw like the jerks and the idiots out there, playing these games. I was always pretty much, for the most part, in a group with, or in a match with, pretty decent people, and back in the 360, unlike now in Xbox One, and I don't know about PS4, but Xbox One. A lot of people were talking back then. Nowadays, there's like hardly anybody. I hardly hear anybody talking, and that might be because of the parties is a little bit more bigger now. So everybody's in a party, and I don't really hear too many randoms out there. But I heard a lot of people, trying to, and I was mostly playing obviously Call of Duty. Big surprise. I actually played the demo on my 360 of Modern Warfare. I did buy it for PC originally, but pretty much after that game, I was buying everything on the Xbox 360 as far as, Call of Duty, not just Call of Duty, but any kind of online game, just because I had more people on there. And obviously on the tail end of that, I started getting more into the Casual Adult Gamers website, and I met a lot of you guys on that, and we were playing, up until now. I'm still playing with people. So yeah, I mean, it was just it was a great community. And then just a couple other points real quick. Indie games, they started kind of coming. I want to say the indie game tidal wave started up then, because I think now it's kind of crashing and just kind of spilling onto everything nowadays. But it was, it was really starting to, rise up, and it was a lot of indie games out there. I forgot the last one I was going to do. I lost my thought here. Oh,
Graphics.
Hold on, graphics. So there was a pretty big jump if you look back from the regular original Xbox to the Xbox 360, and I think the first time I really noticed it when I bought Gears of War. It might have, you might have seen it before that on Forza and stuff like that, but I saw it on Gears of War. I bought the game, and I still had an SD, a standard definition TV. It looked good. It looked really good. I got that HD TV, and I was blown away by it. I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my god! And I was actually playing with actually a coworker at the time. And we were just like pretty much the whole match going back and forth. We couldn't believe how how great this game looked in HD. It was incredible. Go ahead, DB. I'm sorry.
No, that's great. I think you're right. I mean, all these points are really good. And hearing those arguments, I think even before hearing those arguments, I had thought about the fact that any company could withstand, or any council could withstand the failure rate that the Red Ring of Death had, and how they responded, and for it to still sell and dominate. So Prime had 5 Red Rings of Death. Is that what you're? Well, that's how their
Well,
sales
4,
numbers.
but I had 5. Yeah.
Okay. Right, but I think that speaks to the strength of that brand, of that council, is that if people didn't abandon it when there was competition, it was easy to go off to something else, but they continue to come back, and that infrastructure, that online community that you guys have been talking about, only continue to strengthen, right? And in some ways, maybe it's some type of an abused relationship, but I think that it does say a lot about the strength of that council. So I can get behind that as an argument. I think the one thing that I had when I think about the games there, I also think a lot of that, it wasn't so much for me, it wasn't about the games, because a lot of those games you could play on PC. It was, but I think what you guys are articulating is it's the experience around the games that were created, which was unique and viable for the first time, where it wasn't in the past. And so I think that that's a really strong choice for top greatest council as well. But I'm going to let you guys, since I'm deferring and kind of kowtowing to the potential of the 360 being the greatest council, I'll let you guys have a final word on wrapping up there, and then we'll move on to a little bit of what we've been playing before we head out for the night.
So I guess I'll try and get through the quickly. I guess I have like 3 other things to add. So number one, I think a lot of people listening to this, when we talk about the multiplayer, and how, I guess apparently from our voice track, how large a part it may have played in our selection. And I'll say for my own part, I commented a lot on the multiplayer because I enjoyed it so much. But the reason I selected it was because of the robustness and innovation of the service that they provided. How much fun I had playing multiplayer was just a byproduct of that. But I think a lot of people hearing that might say, well, but the PC had that, on lock like years before the Xbox. But I'll say one big thing that occurred in the shift for me to gaming on the 360 on Xbox Live, and it connects to maybe a larger piece of their overall strategy, is Microsoft took the approach of establishing standards and specifications for implementing your games and participating in their service, right? To the point where Microsoft got into like what your UI needed to do from a lobby aspect, right? What were acceptable use cases for you to have in terms of server control. And Prime, you mentioned, you didn't run into a lot of, miscreants back then. Well, one of the big reasons is because, back then, an individual was the host, right? It wasn't until, so when you opened up a PGR3 lobby, you were the host and you had control. And a lot of reasons you didn't run into people like that is because there were good hosts who would get rid of people who were being disruptive. It wasn't until Call of Duty Modern Warfare where hosting really became asymmetric, and there was not really a person. Well, I think Modern Warfare may have even juggled host when one person left, but definitely by Modern Warfare 2,
yeah.
you just jumped into a public pool, right? And there was nobody really in control. You either chose to participate or not, and that's, again, I put my finger on that game release at that point being when things started to go downhill. But so that was a big thing to me that made multiplayer better on PC. But was also, and because of that, was the elimination of cheating, right? So one of my big problems with gaming on PC is it's very hard to find a server where people aren't glitching or just running cheat codes. You have to deal with the whole Punk Buster mess. It was nice to be on the 360 and boot a game up and know that no matter what game you went into, you weren't going to have people just blatantly cheating in the way that they do on PC. So I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, and I guess just for my final say on this, for better or worse, you had the Kinect that came about on there. I really like that piece of hardware, that accessory, whatever you want to call it. I had a lot of fun with it. I had a lot of fun with my family and my like my wife and my kid, but also, other family members, my sisters. We played a lot, Connect games and stuff like that. And, it was, yeah, you had the iToy that came out on PS2, and that maybe that was kind of the beginning of it. And they kind of like rode that wave and made it kind of go up a little bit higher, and maybe not that much because it wasn't like a super huge success, I guess. It was pretty popular, I guess, but, obviously they tried to shoehorn it into Xbox One. That didn't work. But just on the 360, I had a lot of fun with it, and I guess that's all I wanna say about that.
No, that's good. I think, going back to that line of it being the subjective or objective, right? That's not a bad thing, and that's okay to straddle that line. And I think for me, I'm going to still stick by the PlayStation 2 is the greatest, and I think but I hear your points, and I think the really interesting piece there is that I think I've spent more time thinking about the game and the game design versus the experience. And what you guys are convincing me of is that the experience is probably just as valuable. And truthfully, like you said, Prime, this is why doing a podcast like this for 86 episodes has been possible, let alone the other iterations of it, is because we're creating communities, and those communities are a place that we want to spend time in. And so that strengthens that experience regardless of what it is. I think the one. Yeah, go ahead.
The PlayStation 2 is an honorable pick, right? I mean, I can.
Oh, thanks.
I'm not saying I mean, I don't want to be. I'm not being so arrogant as to say you need my validation. I'm just saying I can completely understand that perspective.
Yeah, no, I thank you, and I think I agree, and I guess I'm saying the same thing on the 360. Is that I think it is a really interesting debate between those two, and I think, I think it'd be a whole lot easier to poke holes at a choice that wasn't one of those two. Right.
And one last thing I'll throw in, because you mentioned Prime's metrics. So my own metrics too, just to maybe accentuate that selection is. So I picked the Xbox 360 despite the fact that I had 4 Red Rings of Death, I think, and after the 4th one, so I had a bunch of them, and I eventually tried to get out of it by moving to the Xbox 360 Elite, and that one ran for I don't know, maybe 3 years, maybe 2 or 3 years, and it failed also in 2010. And if everybody remembers the big story, I'm sure you guys have heard it way more times than you want to. But in 2010, when that one failed, I didn't go back. Like I got rid of that 360 Elite, and I bought a new gaming laptop, and I gamed on PC and PlayStation 3 for the remainder of that generation. Despite that fact, I still feel like when I think about all the rational and quantitative criteria, that at the end of the day, I would still have to say the 360 was the greatest console of all time.
Yeah, I can get behind that. And as somebody who may have purchased a PlayStation 2 at one point, also sold it off, and doesn't have any hesitation about not having it. I think the last thing I want to say before we do some quick hits here at the end is, even if that wasn't my pick, I'm looking at my Xbox installed games right now, and I have way more 360 games installed on my Xbox One than I have Xbox One games installed. And maybe that's because of the quality of them, and maybe it's because of the experience that I can get on the Xbox One. What that software lineup is now is different. I think that's again, to me, it speaks to the strength of the argument that you guys are making. So Prime, you have you were not with us last week, and we are glad to have you back. But did you get a chance to maybe spend a little bit of time in front of a screen with a controller to kind of forget about the rest of the world for a while, or spend some time with family?
Yeah, I was able to do a little bit of gaming this past weekend, and actually the weekend before this past week. And I played a few new games here, actually. So I played I don't even know how to pronounce this game. Numa, Breath of Life, which is kind of like, I guess kind of like what do you call it? Walking Dead type of game where you kind of just solving puzzles within the environment and stuff like that. There's no zombies though. But
what console? Xbox One?
Yeah, Xbox One. These are all Xbox Ones, the ones I'm going to talk about. So when you're looking at this game, like if you saw pictures of it or maybe even a few clips, it almost kind of looks like it'd be like a Myst type game where you're kind of going through this, beautiful looking world, and it is. It looks really nice. But I was a little surprised because I thought it was gonna be kind of serious and just kind of a serious game. But you start, and I don't want to give anything away really too much here because even the start of the game might kind of give away a lot of the details. But you start off with this guy, kind of like this guy talking with like almost like a British accent, and he's like really funny. He's really funny throughout the whole playtime so far that I've played. I probably played maybe 45 minutes, an hour or so far. But he's really funny. He's just kind of talking about the world and what's kind of going on, what he's kind of doing, without giving away too much. But you basically just going through the world, just trying to solve puzzles. Within the little rooms, you kind of occupy every so often. You hit a room, you got to do a puzzle. You move on a little bit here and there. So, and he's like just narrating the whole time. So he's very, like I said, he's very funny. So it's actually pretty funny game, which I wasn't expecting at all. I thought it was gonna be totally serious. So that was kind of nice. And then a couple other games I've been playing during the spring update, the spring sale that Xbox had. I bought Mortal Kombat X, so I've been playing that. Fighting game, I've gone back to fighting games for some reason. I don't know why, because I tried Killer Instinct a little while ago and I wasn't too good, but Mortal Kombat's not too bad. There's actually like a separate story mode that you go through. It has, it picks the people for you as you're going through the story, so you can't really pick anybody when you're doing that mode. Or you can just do the regular, versus mode and just even go through that. And you could do all the fatalities and stuff through that. And through the story mode, so far I haven't seen any fatalities. You can't do fatalities or brutalities or anything like that. But it's kind of nice. It's kind of cool just to have like a single player story mode in a fighting game. I guess it's kind of cool. There's cutscenes in between all the fighting and stuff like that. So that's fine. So I'm having and that's Mortal Kombat XL, which has all the DLC that came out for it. So that was about, I think, $20, $22, something like that. So it's a pretty good deal. And then I bought Fallout 4, which kind of surprising even to myself, just because I didn't really like Fallout 3 at all. I think I mentioned this to you, DB, at some point, that there's a lot more color and there's a lot more varied environments in this game. So I'm actually liking it, a lot more than the other game. And there's a little bit of I don't know if you want to call it like Minecraft or even trying to think of that dinosaur game I was playing.
With the base building, with Ark,
Yeah.
right? You have that base
Ark.
building aspect of it, and crafting there. There's certainly more of that than there was in Fallout 3.
Yeah, I don't know. Was there any crafting like that in Fallout 3? Or did you play Fallout 3?
Yeah, I 70 some hours into Fallout 3. Yeah, I mean, I guess
building.
There was not base building in Fallout 3.
Okay.
And you had, you could break things down for materials, but I don't even think you could do that. It was pretty straightforward. You either sold it, you could do a little bit of workbench stuff in terms of repairs, but that was the mechanic in Fallout 3 in New Vegas.
Yeah, so that's the one nice thing about this game, and I hope they bring this into Skyrim, or not Skyrim, but the next Elder Scrolls, where you can break down anything basically that you find in the world. It's not just a random book or a can or something. You can actually do something with it in Fallout 4 and break it down, use it for material. So that's nice. So yeah, I've been enjoying that game. Still a little weird with the shooting. I don't know. I guess I'm not just used to it yet. I guess I don't know. Maybe it's just because I play too many shooters. I'm just expecting hit a few shots and the person dies, but it's not like that here. So you kind of got to be a little more strategic with your shots. And you have the VAT system where it kind of slows down and you can pick like body parts on the person or thing, whatever you're fighting, and it gives you like percentages and stuff like that. So that's cool. I just have to get used to it more. But I'm having a lot more fun with it. I'll usually throw it in there, play maybe a couple levels, and then I'm good to go, and then I'll jump onto something else. So that's pretty much all I've been playing lately. Zeus, how about you?
Sorry, my control panel didn't come up right away when I moused over. So I played a little Destiny on the PlayStation 4 last week. That is what it is. It's nice having completed the single-player campaign finally, and just kind of going back to piddle around. I still love the mechanics of the game, and I don't know that I'll ever stop playing it. So, it's nice even just to meet up with a couple level 40s and have the whatever the dark shadow things are that come in.
Have the Taken spawn in and have to kill X number or try to get the lieutenants and yep.
Right. Still haven't brought myself. Well, maybe I hiccuped on buying the DLC. I said I would buy it now that I've completed the single player campaign. and I would buy like the big bundle that just included all of it, and I would trudge through that. But with the announcement of the upcoming release in September, like I guess I balked this time when I booted it up last week, and I was like, why would I pay for the DLC when I'm perfectly fine just playing what's already there, and the second one releases in 4 months?
So do you just have the vanilla?
I just
The
have
original?
Yep.
Okay, so it is Monday night, and I'm going to say this because we're as you know, because I'm a huge Destiny fan, and I have my Cade 6 pre-order figure right here in front of me. But so on the PlayStation Network, the sale this week is the Taken King update, which I have another story about at some point in time, and it's but the update is $10, $9.99. So
Okay.
it has the 2 year one expansions and the Taken King, which to me is the kind of pinnacle of the storytelling and mission structure that they had over the 3 year span. And paying $30 for the Rise of Iron final expansion that you can knock out in 3 hours, and it's not nearly as consequential or as meaningful. And so if you're looking for it for $10, you got a lot of extra game there and get some good lore and storytelling before you kind of segue out.
Okay, so you probably just sold me because that's a similar experience to another game that I played this week, Drive Club, which actually came out the same year as Destiny in 2014. Long story history, was supposed to be a launch title. Had lots of problems, and this is the team behind MotorStorm, but it finally came out in 2014, a year late. More controversy because it was originally touted that it was going to be free for PlayStation Plus members, and when it did finally release, the game was free, but virtually none of the content was available. It was all behind a paywall. So it's kind of, I'm not even sure if the PlayStation Plus version is available anymore. That's the one that I had because I bought it and downloaded it at release, but really there's no point in getting the PlayStation Plus version. And I was about to throw a temper tantrum, but over the weekend while I was playing this, but in between recording sessions, I went to the store because you can't get it from in the game. When you go to the in-game storefront and hit, upgrade to the full version, it says this content is not available. You actually need to go to the PlayStation Store from your main page. I still call it the media crossbar or whatever. But pleasantly, once I did surf my way over to the full version of the game, it was only $7.50, and I was like, okay, I'm not going to make an argument about that. A ton of content for $7.50. Lots of the competitive tiers and championships unlocked. Arguably, they should have been free in the first place, but they did, and now it's a reasonable racer. It's very Forza-like. I love the game when I'm on the track. I don't love the game when all of the content that's still locked behind either level-based lockups or actual PlayStation Store micro purchases is kind of in my face. And the sad thing is when you're on a part of the screen like the garage and you're looking through the cars that are available and the cars that are not, the level up locks are still free. You just need to get to the level to unlock them. But unfortunately, they just kind of connotatively merge with the stuff that you have to buy from the PlayStation Store. And that's not abundantly clear whether or not those cars are associated with a car pack. I haven't actually hit them. Like in Forza, what I really like is if there's a car that's for purchase and you hit it in game, what it pops up is a dialogue, and I'm talking about Forza 5 and beyond. It hits a dialogue that says this car is, you can either buy this car for $199, $299, whatever it is, or you can buy this car because it's associated in this car pack, and you get 5, 8 cars total, whatever, and that's $699 or $799, or you can just buy a season pass. So it doesn't pull the iTunes thing of like presenting something to you that you could actually buy as part of another thing at a lower cost. It gives you all of the options. It's not apparent to me whether or not Drive Club does that. So right now I'm just kind of cranky about the whole thing. But I really love the game on the track. I love how it handles. I like the cars in it. The championship that I'm playing in now, I dislike in terms of it puts you in events and it locks you to selecting one car, which just rails against my desired freedom and flexibility that I want in a racing game. My standard thing is, look, don't gamify things that you don't need to gamify. Just give me a stable of cars that I can select from and a bunch of tracks, and that's all I need. I don't need you to make it some goofy career-based RPG-ish like thing. Just give me a bunch of cars and a bunch of tracks and let me race on them as I see fit. But it's still pretty fun. And since Destiny is kind of down in that same ballpark of cost in terms of the expansion pack, I will probably grab that. The last thing I played was Painkiller Overdose. Really not the last thing. That was really the middle thing. But this game was rough. It was, it was rough. And for anybody who's a fan of Painkiller from the People Can Fly development studio out of Poland, I think they're out of. Painkiller is kind of this niche favorite of mine and for a lot of PC gamers that involves a character who has died in a car accident along with his wife. And his wife, he and his wife are imprisoned in purgatory. And Painkiller is all about him tracking down generals of Lucifer's army before they can stage and launch a major offensive. And for this, he will be rewarded. It involves a special weapon called the Painkiller, essentially, which is basically this spinning bladed weapon that's attached like to his hand. So Painkiller Overdose is a mod originally that was made by another development team. I don't want to knock them overly because they did this in their free time. They weren't paid for it, so I get it. And eventually it was released. It was picked up by a publisher and released as a game, but it's kind of a palette swap of a lot of the weapons in the original Painkiller. None of them are as visceral or kind of elegant in their physics as the original Painkiller weapons were. So it feels like something lesser than Painkiller. And so the first session, I really didn't enjoy playing it, but something happens about 15 or 20 minutes in where it kind of starts. It's kind of like a car wreck. Like you don't want to be near it, but you can't take your eyes off of it once you're there. And so I continued playing it, and I don't mind it as much now. Again, I don't want to sound like I'm being overly critical. I'm just trying to describe the gaming experience. It actually improved when I just plugged a pair of headphones into my phone and just found like these YouTube gaming music videos that, have a lot of like gaming oriented, like chip tunes and dubstep and stuff like that, and listen to that instead of listening to the game's dialogue. So like I said, it was rough, but it's kind of Army of Darkness, B-D movie-ish. There is a level of enjoyment in playing it. Prime, were you going to jump in on something there?
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Nope. Yeah. And then DB, what about you, man? What have you been playing?
So I did a little bit of spot checking, right? Because this is the podcast where we're looking up facts this week. So Painkiller 2004 is when it originally came out. So yeah, that I do remember it at the time. I remember it kind of even at the when it came out on PC that it was kind of janky a little bit and a little niche, but definitely in that kind of mid 2000s Serious Sam type of aspects there. So interesting to go down memory lane on that one.
And I just want to specify in case it didn't come across. So what I was talking about and describing was a standalone expansion on that pop culture topic. So Painkiller Overdose was what I was playing. I actually really enjoyed the original Painkiller.
Great, good. And so I spent a little bit of time this week, obviously, in some Destiny. I played a little bit of the Overwatch PvE, kind of the pseudo story mode in terms of doing a couple of different objectives and doing a co-op experience there, which was great. But similar to Zeus's experience, what I spent the most time playing this past weekend was a game where the mechanics haven't shifted drastically since probably the GameCube era, and that is Mario Kart 8 Deluxe on the Switch. So picking up that, and actually that's why I was late for the podcast tonight and late for the start, is that I was playing some of the new battle mode with my two sons, and I think the game itself is wonderful. If you've played it on the Wii U, this is a little bit of everything. It's all the DLC, and it's all unlocked. You don't have to, the only thing that's locked are different carts and wheels and things like that. But all the racers, all the courses are unlocked, unlike before.
Nice.
So Yeah, it's actually it's pretty fun. The little Joy-Cons work okay. I've been using those in part because trying to get them sunk together and keeping them charged multiple places where they've been sitting in a drawer because it's only been a single player machine. Need to charge some of those back up. But it's really solid. The battle mode, I'm not necessarily sold on. The battle mode is back. We were playing that with my sons, but I think if you enjoyed the battle mode, it'll be really interesting. It was kind of fun playing in the same room. It'll be more interesting to see how the online around that develops. And so again, it has online compatibility, but it's launching before kind of whatever their chat function is, which is supposed to be coming out this summer. So I'm sure I'll have more to talk about that because it's one of those where you can come back and pick it up, and it reminds me of how much fun it is just to play sometimes. So, gentlemen, and sometimes it's just fun to spend some time talking about the greatest console generation or just spending time talking with you guys. So before we wrap up at the 1 hour mark, I want to kick it back over to you guys. Any final thoughts? Any upcoming things on your radar for this coming week? Prime?
Actually, I did. There was one thing, excuse me, that I forgot to mention was I got a Samsung VR from one of my friends. I was kind of playing around with that a little bit. It's actually pretty cool. I never did any VR before that. So, and I'm strikingly, I can actually put it over my glasses. So, because otherwise I can't really see anything. It's like kind of blurry. But I can use it with my glasses. I've only played a couple like games so far. I can't remember the last one I played. It's like you're almost on this beach and you kind of control these different kind of guns, and there's these like tanks and jeeps and stuff coming at you. You just kind of move your head around and you can shoot. So it was pretty cool. I like it. Looks pretty fun, you know. But other than that, nope, that's about it. Zeus.
Nope, nothing to add. I know we ran over our target time, so.
All right. Well, we'll sneak it just in under the wire of a 1 hour podcast. So thank you all for listening, enjoying. Again, this will be posted up on Gearworks over the next couple of days, so you can download it and continue to take us with you and argue while you're driving and in your commute or doing housework, and your rest of your family will wonder why is he yelling at the air, and disagree with us about what our greatest console generation is, or not even generation, just our greatest consoles. But you should be able to find us again back here at Band of Gamers later this week as we try to continue to toy around with our format and try to do another quick news podcast. But we will certainly be back next week at this same time to talk about whatever topic strikes our fancy, maybe something even a little more current of not so much navel gazing as we've had over the last couple weeks. But until then, I want to thank you all for joining us, and feel free to, again, like, share, and subscribe, and keep us with you, whether you're doing it here on YouTube or over on Gearworks and keeping track of us there. On behalf of myself, DBQ Hams, and Osiris Prime Sonic the Hedgehog, and Zeus Adamus, this has been the Band of Gamers, and until next time, see ya.